The Shadow of Betrayal. It was supposed to be the perfect evening. Michael sat across from his wife, Laura, at their favorite restaurant, where the candlelight flickered in soft hues, and the ambiance was as romantic as it could get. Yet, despite the serene setting, a strange unease had been creeping up on him for weeks. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, something just beyond his grasp, lingering like a secret kept in the shadows. "Are you okay?" Laura asked, her smile charming but distant, her eyes never fully meeting his. "You seem distant." Michael's pulse quickened. He had noticed it before, the little cracks in their marriage that no one else seemed to notice, the late nights, the odd behavior, the phone calls she would take outside. He wanted to ask, but fear gripped him, unsure if he was ready to hear the truth. "I'm fine," Michael said, forcing a smile, but the knot in his stomach only tightened. As they finished dinner, Michael felt the unsettling pressure of an unspoken tension between them. Something wasn't right, and the nagging suspicion he'd been harboring for months clawed at him again. The investigation that night, Michael couldn't sleep. His mind raced, replaying every conversation, every glance, every unspoken word. Finally, he gave in to the urge and decided to investigate. He rifled through Laura's things, the drawer where she kept her phone, the closet where she hid her journals. It was a delicate balance, walking the fine line between love and distrust, but his gut was telling him to dig deeper. It wasn't long before he found the messages. At first, it was a series of innocuous texts from a colleague, then casual exchanges. But soon they became more suggestive. One text, in particular, stopped Michael's heart in its tracks. "I can't wait for tonight. You know what this means." His hand shook as he scrolled back through the messages, uncovering more and more. The sender was someone he knew, Daniel, a charming, well-groomed man Laura had been working with for years. The realization hit Michael like a punch to the stomach. Laura had been seeing him behind his back. Confrontation, the next morning, Michael could barely stomach the thought of seeing Laura. His world, everything he thought he knew about their marriage, had been shattered. But he had to confront her. He had to know the truth. "Laura," he said, his voice tight with emotion as she walked into the kitchen. "We need to talk." Laura froze, her face instantly blank, as if she knew exactly what was coming. "What's this about?" "Who is Daniel?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Her face paled. For a moment, she looked as though she might deny it, but then her shoulders slumped in defeat. "I didn't want to hurt you, Michael. I never meant for it to go this far." A cold silence filled the room. "I know," Michael said, the pain in his voice cutting through the air. "I found the messages." Laura's eyes welled up, but she didn't look away. "I don't want to lose you, Michael. But I've been unhappy for a long time. I thought this would make things better." The downward spiral. The confrontation only deepened Michael's sense of betrayal. The more Laura spoke, the more it became clear that her affair with Daniel wasn't just a one-time lapse in judgment. It was an ongoing relationship, one that had taken root in the shadows of their marriage. She claimed to still love him, but Michael couldn't see past the lies anymore. She'd torn their bond apart, and now nothing could repair it. Michael hired a private investigator to uncover the full extent of her betrayal. Every step he took only revealed more secrets. Hidden bank accounts, late-night meetings, cryptic phone calls. The man he thought he knew, the woman he thought he loved were both strangers in his eyes. His investigation revealed an even darker truth. Laura and Daniel were planning to leave him, to steal everything he'd worked for, and frame him for a crime he didn't commit. It was all meticulously planned. His downfall was their ticket to freedom. The final confrontation, Michael had had enough. He couldn't keep living in this nightmare, so he confronted Laura one last time. The tension between them was palpable, the silence charged with unspoken emotions. "Why?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why do this to me? What did I ever do to deserve this?" Laura stood in front of him, her face an unreadable mask. "I didn't want this. I never wanted to hurt you. But somewhere along the way I lost myself. I didn't know how to get out of it." Suddenly, everything around Michael seemed to distort. The colors in the room blurred, the sounds faded into a distant hum. His world, his reality seemed to crack like a fragile piece of glass. The betrayal, the pain, the lies, all of it began to fade, slipping away as though it were never real. The awakening. Michael jolted awake, gasping for air. His heart raced as he looked around. He was back in his bed, the morning sun streaming through the window. The unraveling Michael stared at the message, his mind racing. His heart pounded in his chest as the weight of the situation pressed down on him. The dream. It wasn't just a figment of his imagination. It had been a warning, an insight into something far darker and more real than he had ever expected. The lines between reality and his dream began to blur. His thoughts whirled in a storm of questions. Why had he dreamt of it so vividly? Was it some sort of premonition? Or had his subconscious picked up on something in the waking world that he'd missed? And most chillingly, was Laura in on it all along? He couldn't trust anyone anymore, not even himself. The search for truth. The day stretched on like an endless horizon, each passing hour weighing heavier on him as he tried to reconcile the world he thought he knew with the new reality that had begun to unfold. The text was just the beginning. His mind kept replaying the dream over and over, trying to decode its cryptic messages, trying to make sense of what was real and what wasn't. With a surge of urgency, Michael decided he needed answers. He couldn't ignore the message. He couldn't walk away from this knowing that his life had been torn apart by lies and deceit. Laura was getting ready for work when he approached her. Her usual calm demeanor seemed unaffected, but Michael saw something in her eyes. Something flickered there, something that made him question everything. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Laura looked at him, with that familiar, serene smile. "Sure. What's going on?" "You and Daniel," Michael began, keeping his tone even. "There's something going on, isn't there? I know about the texts. I found them on your phone." Her smile faltered for the briefest second, but it was enough. It was enough to confirm that everything he had suspected was true. Laura knew. She knew the truth was out, and now there was nowhere to hide. "Michael, please," she started, but her voice cracked, as though she was struggling to maintain control. "This isn't what you think." "You don't get to lie to me anymore," Michael cut her off. "I know what's happening. I don't know why you're doing this, but I'm not going to let you destroy everything we've built. I'm done being a fool." Laura took a step back, her breath shallow, her expression unreadable. She seemed to wrestle with something internally, as though deciding whether to continue the charade or let the truth spill out. Then finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want you to find out like this, but Daniel, he's not who you think he is. There's more to it." Michael's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "There's a bigger picture here," she said, her eyes scanning the room as though checking to make sure no one else was listening. "He's been working with someone who's been pulling the strings behind everything. It's not just an affair. It's not just about us." A chill ran down Michael's spine. "Who? Who's behind this? I can't say. Not yet. But you have to trust me, Michael. It's all connected. Daniel isn't just some guy I've been seeing. He's part of something much bigger, and I never wanted you to get involved." The descent into darkness. Laura's words hung in the air like poison. Every instinct in Michael screamed at him to walk away, to leave this nightmare behind, but he couldn't. His curiosity was a blade digging into his chest, urging him to dig deeper, to uncover what Laura was hiding. As the day wore on, Michael grew obsessed with the mystery. The text, Laura's cryptic words, Daniel's involvement, the dream that had come before, all of it was connected. He couldn't just sit back and wait for the inevitable. He had to take control. But the more he dug, the more he found that the trail led to a labyrinth of secrets. Laura's connection to Daniel wasn't just about betrayal. It was part of a much larger scheme, a conspiracy that involved high-profile individuals, money laundering, and even corporate espionage. Daniel, it seemed, wasn't the only one involved. There were others, people with power, people with motives, people who had used Laura as a pawn in their twisted game. And then, just when Michael thought he had uncovered everything, he received a new message on Laura's phone. "I've taken care of it. You'll get your cut soon. Stay in line. This isn't over." It was from someone named Victor, someone Michael had never heard of. But the tone of the message made it clear. This wasn't just about Laura anymore. This was something far more dangerous. The revelation, Michael's mind spun as he pieced the puzzle together. He confronted Laura one final time, his patience thin, the frustration boiling over. "Who is Victor?" he demanded, voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "Who are you really working with? What the hell is going on?" Laura's eyes filled with tears as she stepped back, her face pale. "You don't understand, Michael. The dark web unravels." The fluorescent lights of the interrogation room flickered overhead as Michael sat, his mind spinning in a fog of disbelief. He had been in this room for hours now, the police questioning him relentlessly about his involvement in the crime. A crime he had no knowledge of, no part in. Every time he tried to explain, they only pushed harder, their suspicion growing. "You're not telling us everything, Mr. Foster," Detective Turner said, leaning forward, his eyes piercing. "We know about the affair. We know about the money. We know about the connections. So why don't you just be honest with us? Where does Victor fit into all of this?" Michael opened his mouth, but no words came. He was caught in a web he didn't understand, a web spun by people far more powerful than him. Every piece of evidence pointed to him, and every time he tried to unravel the truth, the threads seemed to slip further away from his grasp. "I don't know anything about Victor," Michael said, his voice hoarse. "I swear. I don't know why Laura would—" His words were interrupted by the harsh sound of the door opening. A man entered, his silhouette dark against the harsh lights of the room. Michael didn't recognize him at first, but the man's presence sent a chill crawling up his spine. "Mr. Foster, is it?" the man said, his voice smooth, cold, almost rehearsed. "I think we need to talk." A new player. The man stepped forward and took a seat across from Michael, his gaze unwavering. There was something about him, something unnerving. His appearance was immaculate, and the air around him seemed to pulse with authority. This was no ordinary investigator. Michael could feel the weight of his presence. "My name is Eli Hayes," the man said, his voice calm, controlled. "And I'm here because we need to set the record straight." "Who are you?" Michael asked, trying to hide the tremor in his voice. "What is this? Another interrogation?" Eli gave a slight, almost amused smile. "Not exactly. I'm the one who has the answers you've been looking for, Mr. Foster. And I think you're about to find out that your entire life has been built on lies." Michael's stomach dropped. He wasn't sure whether to be terrified or relieved. Answers? After all this? Could this man really provide them? Or was this just another part of the game? Everything you think you know about your wife, your marriage, the affair, it's all part of something much bigger than you could have imagined, Eli continued, his voice unwavering. And if you want to get out of this, you're going to have to play along. Revelations. Michael's pulse quickened. What are you talking about? What bigger thing? What's really going on? Eli leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. You were never just a victim of a cheating wife, Mr. Foster. You were a target, part of a much larger operation. The affair with Daniel? A setup? Laura's betrayal? It was staged, carefully orchestrated? Michael blinked, unable to process the magnitude of what Eli was saying. What do you mean? How could that be possible? Why would she? Laura was never the one in control. The strings were pulled from above, Eli said, his tone sharpening. You've been watching the wrong player. Victor, Daniel, even Laura, they were just pieces of the puzzle. The real person pulling the strings is someone you would never expect. The room seemed to close in on Michael, the walls pressing in as Eli's words sank in. You think this is just about an affair, about betrayal? No, this is about power, control, money laundering, corporate espionage. Everything you've seen in your dreams and worse, it's all real. It's all happening. And you've been dragged into it. A deeper game. Who's behind this? Michael asked, his voice barely a whisper, as though the answer could somehow make it all real. Who's running everything? Eli's eyes darkened. Victor is just one part of a much larger organization. They call themselves the Circle. They've infiltrated businesses, governments, and financial institutions. They control everything from the shadows. And they've been using you, Mr. Foster, as a pawn in their game. Michael's mind raced. Everything he had seen, everything he had suspected, had been part of a far-reaching conspiracy. The affair, the lies, the cryptic messages. Laura had never been the villain. She was a victim just as much as he was, trapped in a game she didn't fully understand. And Daniel? Michael asked, his voice shaking. What about him? Eli leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Daniel is a broker. He's been working for the Circle for years. His job is to find people like you, ordinary people with nothing to lose, and manipulate them into situations that serve the Circle's interests. They set you up, made you think you were losing your wife, when in fact, you were just losing control. Michael's chest tightened. Why me? Why drag me into this? I'm just an average guy. Eli's eyes locked onto his. Because you were the perfect mark. A dangerous choice. Michael stood there, feeling the weight of Eli's words sinking in. The offer on the table was a poisoned chalice, and he could taste its bitter edge. He knew that if he agreed to Eli's proposition, there was no turning back. It would pull him deeper into a web of shadows and deceit, where alliances shifted like sand and trust was a fragile thing. But what choice did he have? The Circle had already infiltrated his life in ways he couldn't comprehend, and now they were offering him a chance to fight back. He left the interrogation room in a daze, the air outside feeling too fresh, too open for someone so entangled. Michael's mind churned with the possibility of becoming an insider, a mole within the Circle. He thought about Laura, about the life they'd built together, and about the dark forces he had never seen. She had been a pawn, just like him, manipulated by people far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. The price of knowledge. The next few days were a blur of tension and uncertainty. Michael spent his nights researching the Circle, digging, through any connection he could find, every piece of information that might lead him to uncover more of their operations. But nothing was simple. Every lead was dead or twisted. Every name he came across was connected to another shadow, another player in this game. The more he uncovered, the more it felt like he was sinking into a hole that would eventually swallow him whole. But there was something inside him that refused to let go, that refused to let the lies stand. He spent hours locked in his office, scrolling through encrypted messages, trying to decipher the web of lies. Then, just as he thought he had reached an impasse, a name appeared. Victor Gray. Not just a name, but a dossier, complete with connections to high-level politicians, businessmen, and even law enforcement officials. It hit him like a punch to the gut. Victor wasn't just a part of the circle. He was one of its architects. The return of Laura late one evening, as Michael sifted through the information, trying to make sense of it all, the doorbell rang. He wasn't expecting anyone, least of all Laura. She had been distant, unreachable, after their confrontation. But now, she stood at his doorstep, her eyes wide, a look of fear in her expression that made Michael's stomach twist. "Michael," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder as if checking to make sure no one was watching. "We need to talk. It's worse than I thought." He stared at her, the mixture of anger and confusion still bubbling inside him. She had lied to him for so long, betrayed him in ways that were almost impossible to forgive. But now, something about her tone, the desperation in her voice, pulled at something deep within him. "Come in," he said, his voice rough. Once inside, Laura wasted no time. She paced around the room, wringing her hands, clearly on edge. "I didn't know how deep it went, Michael. I didn't know who I was really dealing with. They're watching me, watching us. And it's only a matter of time before they come, for you, too." Michael's heart sank. He had suspected something was off, but hearing the fear in her voice made it all too real. "What do you mean they're watching us? What are you talking about?" he demanded. "The circle," she said, her voice trembling. "They never intended for you to find out. They needed me to keep you in the dark while they set everything up. They knew you'd figure it out sooner or later, but they never thought you'd get this close. And now they're coming for us both." Michael's head spun. "So, all of this, the affair, the lies, it was all part of their plan? To keep me distracted while they built something bigger?" Laura nodded, her eyes full of guilt. "Yes. You were never just a husband or a victim in this. You were part of the distraction. They used our marriage, our lives, to cover up their bigger operation." The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. The affair, the heartbreak, the shattered trust, it had all been a setup. But why? What was the bigger picture? "You have to. Help me, Michael," Laura said, desperation creeping into her voice. "I know you think I betrayed you, and in a way I did, but I didn't have a choice. Now I want to take them down. But we need to act fast. They're coming for both of us." The twist Michael sat in stunned silence as the weight of her words settled on him. He had to make a choice, one that could alter the course of his life forever. Help Laura, join Eli, take down the circle, or walk away from it all and let the pieces fall where they may. But just as he was about to speak, the phone rang, cutting through the tension in the room. He glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number, but something about the call made his pulse quicken. Without thinking, he answered. "Michael," came Eli's calm voice. "I trust you're starting to realize the gravity of the situation. You've uncovered quite a bit, but you're not alone in this anymore. A dangerous game." The silence between them was unbearable. Michael's heart beat erratically, his breath shallow. His gaze never wavered from Laura, waiting for her to speak, waiting for her to unravel the truth, or perhaps continue to weave. Her lies. Laura's eyes flickered, guilt and fear flashing across her face as she hesitated. Michael could see the weight of the decision hanging over her. For the first time, he wasn't sure who she really was. The woman he had once trusted with his heart and his life had become a stranger. "Michael," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I swear I didn't want this. I never asked for any of it." "Then why did you do it?" Michael asked, his voice cold, but beneath the ice was the raw, aching vulnerability that he had tried to bury. "Why did you get involved with the circle? Why keep the secret from me?" Laura's shoulders slumped, and her eyes welled with tears. "I was trying to protect you. From them. From everything. Michael's pulse quickened, but he held back. Protect me? Or was I just another pawn? Another piece of your game? Her lips trembled as she looked down, then back up at him, her eyes filled with sorrow. I never meant for it to go this far, Michael. I didn't have a choice. You think I wanted to live like this? With one foot in the circle, one foot in this life? It's suffocating, and I'm scared. Michael stood, his chair scraping across the floor with an unpleasant screech as his mind reeled from the revelations. He wanted to believe her, but everything had changed. The phone call with Eli still echoed in his ears, and now the walls of his life, his marriage, his trust in Laura were crumbling in real time. Eli had warned him. Could Laura's plea for redemption be another manipulation? Or was she really caught in the same trap? You've been playing both sides, Michael said, his words harsh, cutting through the room like a blade. How can I trust you now? After everything that's happened, how can I believe you? Laura reached for him, but he pulled away instinctively, her touch feeling foreign. Michael, please. I never wanted this to be the outcome. But if we don't... Stop them now. Everything we know, everything we've had will be gone. The circle will destroy us both, and I'll lose you forever. Michael's thoughts swirled in turmoil. His mind was frantically connecting dots that were always out of reach. Until now. The affair, the lies, the money, and now the circle. It had always been about control, power, money laundering, but he hadn't seen how deeply he had been involved. And Laura, his wife, who he'd trusted with everything, had become part of their game. A moment of truth. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Laura? Michael asked, his voice quieter now, but tinged with the raw edge of betrayal. Why drag me into this? Why wait until now to come clean? Laura swallowed, looking defeated. Because I was scared, Michael. Scared they would hurt you. Scared you'd leave me. I tried to distance myself, to shield you, but it wasn't enough. It never was. The more I tried to protect us, the deeper I sank into their web. But I can't let them win. I need you to trust me now. Just once. If we expose them together, we can take them down. Michael's instincts screamed at him to walk away, to turn his back on her, on this world that had become a nightmare. Yet something in her eyes, a flicker of the woman he once loved, held him captive. The stakes were higher than ever. He was in too deep now, no matter how hard he tried to deny it. His gaze turned to the window, the night outside dark and ominous. His future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. There was no going back. The choice. A dangerous alliance before. Michael could respond. The phone rang again, its shrill tone cutting through the fragile moment. His hand trembled as he reached for it, but as soon as he saw the caller ID, his stomach sank. It was Eli. Don't pick up, Laura warned, her voice urgent, though there was a hint of fear in her eyes. But Michael did anyway, answering with a calm. He didn't feel. Michael. Eli's voice came through, smooth as ever, but carrying an undeniable undercurrent of threat. I gave you time to think. I hope you've come to your senses. You can't save her, and you can't save yourself by running from this. But you can join us. Help us bring the circle to its knees. If you don't, they'll come for you next. You know it's true. Michael's blood ran cold. He could hear the smug certainty in Eli's voice, like a predator circling his prey. Eli was right. Michael was too far in to simply walk away. He turned his gaze back to Laura, whose eyes were wide with fear. What are they going to do to us, Michael? She whispered, voice shaking. We can't keep running forever. He didn't answer right away. His mind was working, trying to weigh the consequences of every decision. Then he exhaled slowly, finally speaking. I don't know what's worse. The lies we've been living, or the truth we have to face now. The Webb Titans, the days after their decision to play both sides felt like a slow descent into chaos. Michael and Laura spent their time carefully crafting their moves, observing the circle from every angle, waiting for the right moment to strike. They knew they were walking a razor-thin line, balancing between trust and deception, survival and destruction. Their first step was simple: infiltrate. Michael had always been a man of action, someone who preferred solving problems with his hands. But in this new world, words were their weapons, and alliances were as volatile as the people they dealt with. They had no choice but to play Eli's game, for now. Late one night, Laura received a message from Eli instructing them to meet at an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city. It was the kind of place where secrets were buried and where power shifts often took place behind closed doors. Michael knew the stakes were rising, and everything they had been building toward would either fall apart or fall into place here. The meeting. They arrived in separate cars, ensuring there was no trace of them being together. The building loomed in the darkness, an empty shell of forgotten promises and broken dreams. The air was thick with tension as they stepped out, Michael's every instinct telling him to be cautious, to trust no one. Yet there they were, back, in the game, playing their parts. Inside, Eli stood waiting. His calm demeanor masked the power he held, but Michael could see through it. He could feel the subtle undertone of danger in the air. Eli was a predator, and they were the prey, at least for now. "You both made the right choice," Eli said with a slight smile, the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. "But we both know this is just the beginning. If you want to take down the circle, you'll need to play smarter than you ever have before." Michael narrowed his eyes. "And how exactly are we supposed to do that?" Eli's smile widened. "You'll be getting closer to the heart of the operation soon enough, but first I need you to show your loyalty. Prove you're in this, and that you're not playing a double game." Laura stepped forward, her voice steady. "What's the next step?" Eli chuckled, taking a step closer to them. "The next step is trust. We'll need to test your loyalty before moving forward. And for that, I've got a small assignment for you. Something simple. Infiltrate a meeting. Find out what the circle's next big move is." Michael's chest tightened. It was clear they were about to step into even more dangerous waters. But they had no choice. There was no turning back now. The plan over the next few days, Michael and Laura spent their time preparing. The meeting Eli had referred to was set to take place in a few nights, and they would need to get close enough to gather vital information without drawing suspicion. It wasn't just about getting the answers they needed, it was about earning the Circle's trust, proving they weren't a threat. They didn't talk much during this time. There was too much at stake. But as the night of the meeting approached, the tension between them grew palpable. Trust was a fragile thing, and their past mistakes hovered over them like a dark cloud. Laura, in particular, seemed lost in thought, her eyes distant as if wrestling with something deep inside her. The night of the meeting. The night of the meeting arrived faster than Michael expected. They were both on edge as they dressed in the dark suits Eli had instructed them to wear. They'd been given false identities, new personas to blend in with the Circle's members. Michael's pulse was steady, his mind focused, but there was a nagging feeling in his gut that wouldn't let go. Laura stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her tie, her hands trembling slightly. "Do you think this will work?" she asked softly, her voice uncertain. "That we can pull this off?" Michael walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to steady her. "We don't have a choice. This is the only way. We need to get to the core of the Circle. The more we know, the better our chances of taking them down." She nodded, but Michael could see the doubt in her eyes. Infiltration. The meeting took place in a nondescript conference room inside a high-rise building, one of many that belonged to the Circle's web of influence. Michael and Laura entered separately, blending in with the crowd of influential figures and shadowy figures whose names Michael had only heard in passing, but never fully understood. The room was filled with people who spoke in hushed tones, exchanging glances that spoke volumes more than words ever could. They were among them now, watching, listening, and waiting for their moment. As the meeting began, Michael's eyes scanned the room, searching for anything that could give him a clue about what the circle was planning next. He could feel the weight of the power in the room, the oppressive silence that hung in the air as each person took their seat. The web tightens further. The flickering lights came back on with a jolt, casting a sharp contrast between the chaos of the room and the eerie stillness that followed. Michael's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragmented puzzle of betrayal, lies and double crosses. Eli's grin only deepened, as if savoring the moment, watching Michael unravel. "What's going on, Eli?" Michael's voice was cold, his grip on Laura's hand tightening, not out of affection, but out of instinct. He knew that in this room, no one was safe, least of all them. Eli stepped forward, his eyes flickering with something far darker than just the usual smugness. "It's quite simple, Michael. You thought you were playing the game, but you were being played. All of you were. There's a traitor, yes, but it's not who you think." Laura's breath hitched beside him, but her voice came out steady. "What do you mean, Eli? What are you talking about?" He let out a soft chuckle. "It's not just about loyalty, Laura. It's about who's willing to sacrifice everything for the right prize. And you—" He looked at Michael with piercing eyes, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. "You thought you could outsmart us. But you're too late." Suddenly, the room was flooded with harsh light. People, members of the circle, some familiar, some unknown, rushed toward the center, surrounding them in a swift, practiced maneuver. Michael's breath caught in his throat as he realized the trap had been set. This wasn't just a meeting. It was a reckoning. The door slammed shut behind them, cutting off their escape. The soft click of a lock echoed like a death sentence. Michael's heart pounded, and for a fleeting moment, he wondered if this was the end. He had been so focused on the idea of exposing the circle, of reclaiming his life, but now, it all felt out of his control. All of it, his past, his present, had led him to this moment. "Eli," Michael said, his voice now laced with an edge of desperation, "what do you want from us?" Eli's smile didn't fade. "Oh, Michael, I want nothing from you. You're already too far in. You've been the perfect pawn, the perfect accomplice, without even realizing it." Laura's grip on Michael's hand loosened slightly. Her voice was strained, almost as if she knew what was coming. "You're not making any sense." Eli turned away from them, addressing the crowd with a calm confidence. "You see, the circle doesn't operate on loyalty alone. We operate on power, manipulation, and control. And right now, I hold all the cards." A man in the crowd spoke up, his voice gravelly and deep. "So what now? Do we kill them?" "No," Eli said, waving a hand dismissively. "Not yet. Michael and Laura still have roles to play in this game." Michael's stomach churned. This was worse than he had thought. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about losing his very humanity to the game they were playing. The reveal. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with the weight of uncertainty. Michael felt Laura tense beside him. He could hear her breathing, shallow, controlled, but he knew she was just as on edge as he was. The unknown had become their only certainty. Eli took a step toward them, his gaze never leaving Michael's. "You see, Laura, you weren't the only one with a secret. Michael's been a part of this longer than either of you realized." Michael froze. His pulse spiked in an instant. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice rising. Laura looked at him in confusion, but there was a flicker of suspicion in her eyes now. "Michael?" Eli leaned in, a predator sizing up its prey. You think you've been playing catch-up, following clues, trying to outwit me? But the truth is, you've been a part of the circle's game all along. The words hit like a punch to the gut. Michael felt the ground shift beneath him. He turned to Laura, but her expression was unreadable now. Was it possible? Had he been duped from the very start? No, Michael started, but Eli cut him off. Let me explain, Eli said with twisted amusement. You don't remember, do you? Your first assignment, the one where you made that little mistake, the one that nearly cost you everything, the circle's first test of loyalty. Michael's breath caught in his throat. His mind raced to that day, the first slip-up that haunted him ever since. Had it been a test? Had it been orchestrated from the beginning? Was everything, every small decision, part of a much larger plan? Laura's face softened, the suspicion turning to hurt. You knew? You've been working with them all along? The question echoed in Michael's mind, but he had no answer. The walls of his reality, which had felt so secure, now seemed paper-thin. No, Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know. I thought I was protecting you. All of us, Eli chuckled darkly. Protection? Michael, this was never about protecting anyone. You were just another pawn in a game you didn't even know you were playing. The final decision. The weight of Laura's words hung in the air, suffocating Michael with the suffocating realization that everything he thought he understood was wrong. Betrayal wasn't just something that had happened to him. It was something he had been complicit in without even knowing it. He had spent years chasing shadows, trying to expose the truth, but in the end, the truth had always been closer than he realized. Eli's voice broke the silence, cold and final. It's too late to turn back now. You've already made your choice, Michael. Now you have to live with it. Michael's chest tightened. His thoughts raced, the room spinning around him. He had once been a man of principles, but those principles had slowly crumbled away piece by piece until there was nothing left but a hollow shell of his former self. The reality that he was trapped in the circle's web was undeniable, and even now, he couldn't see a way out. Laura's eyes were filled with pain, but there was something else there, something darker, more calculating. The betrayal that had once felt like a distant possibility now felt like a living, breathing thing between them. The truth was, Michael didn't know who to trust anymore. Michael, Laura said, her voice steady but laced with regret, if you choose them, if you go through with this, there's no coming back. Do you understand that? He nodded slowly, though part of him still fought against the pull of Eli's words, still fought to deny the terrible reality that his life had become. Eli's grin never wavered. She's right, Michael. There's no going back. You'll either be a part of this, or you'll become a problem. And we don't leave problems alive. The breaking point. Everything in Michael screamed at him to turn away, to reject the suffocating hold the circle had on him. But with each passing second, he could feel himself slipping deeper into its clutches, the weight of his choices pulling him further into the abyss. The tension in the room was palpable. The faces of the circle members were unreadable, but Michael could sense the unspoken judgment in their eyes. They were waiting for him to make a choice, to prove his loyalty. But there was one thing he couldn't shake. The nagging question that had been eating at him since this whole twisted game began. Why had Eli chosen him? Why me, Eli? Michael asked, his voice hoarse. Why did you bring me into this? I'm not like them. I was just trying to get answers, to make things right. Eli's eyes sparkled with amusement. Because you're exactly like them, Michael. You've always been like them. You just didn't know it yet. You wanted power, control. You wanted to tear everything down and build it in your image. You've been playing a game all along, and now you're just realizing it. Michael's stomach churned. The truth was ugly, but it was becoming impossible to deny. Eli was right. From the very first mistake, the first misstep that led him deeper. Into the Circle's world, Michael had been part of this twisted game. His desire for answers, his need for revenge, had led him here, and now he couldn't escape it. "Do you really think I'm like you?" Michael whispered, staring into Eli's calculating eyes. "Do you really think I've been chasing this for power?" Eli's smile faltered, if only for a moment. "You can't even see it, can you? You've been in this game from the moment you stepped into the darkness. Every choice you made brought you closer to us, and now you're here, standing at the precipice of everything." The choice Laura took a step back, her gaze fixed on Michael, but she said nothing. The tension between them had already reached its breaking point. She wasn't just afraid of him anymore. She was afraid of what he would do next. Michael's mind was a whirlpool of confusion, doubt, and regret. He could hear Eli's voice, calm and predatory, urging him to make the final decision. He turned to Laura, her eyes filled with tears, tears of frustration, of betrayal. Her pain was raw, palpable, but even now, Michael wasn't sure if she could be trusted. Could she have been playing him all along, just as he had been played? Eli was waiting for him to choose. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him, suffocating him. I don't want this," Michael whispered, but the words felt hollow in the air. They meant nothing. He had already crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Eli's eyes narrowed. "You don't have a choice. You never did." Michael's heart raced. The room felt smaller now, suffocating. He could feel the walls closing in on him. This was it, the moment he either embraced the darkness or walked away and risked losing everything, the reveal. The door behind them suddenly opened, cutting through the tension like a knife. A new figure stepped into the room, someone Michael had never expected to see again. It was the woman from the past, the one he had thought was gone. Her presence sent a shockwave through Michael's chest. "Lila?" The unraveling Lila's words hung in the air like a cold breeze. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, the tension growing thicker with each passing second. Michael's mind raced, trying to comprehend what she had just said. The real game? What did she mean? Eli's eyes flickered between Lila and Michael, his expression hardening. "Enough of this! You're not welcome here!" he spat, his voice dripping with venom. He took a step toward Lila, his posture menacing. Lila didn't flinch. Instead, she gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, as though she knew exactly how this moment would unfold. "You're still playing the old game, Eli. You think you control everything, but you don't." She turned to Michael, her eyes filled, with a strange mix of pity and understanding. "You've been caught in a web, Michael, one you didn't even know was being spun." Michael's heart hammered in his chest. "What web?" His voice was tight with frustration. "What are you trying to tell me?" Lila took a slow, deliberate step toward him, her gaze never leaving his face. "The circle isn't just about power, Michael. It's about manipulation, yes. But it's also about control over perception, over reality itself." A chill ran down his spine as the weight of her words sank in. Perception. Reality. Was this just another layer of the game he hadn't been able to see? A game where nothing was as it seemed? Lila continued, her voice low but firm. "The truth isn't what you think it is. The story you've been told, the one where you're the victim, the betrayed husband, the wronged man, is just that. A story, and like all stories, it's been written by someone else." Michael felt a knot form in his stomach. Who's been writing it? Who's been pulling the strings? Lila's smile faded, replaced by a more somber look. "You need to wake up, Michael. You've been living in a world that's not real, and you've been feeding into it, step by step, without even realizing it." For the first time, Michael felt a flicker of doubt. He looked at Eli, who stood motionless, his jaw clenched in frustration. The question burned in Michael's mind. Was Eli part of this larger game, too? Had everything, every move, been orchestrated long before he ever stepped into the circle's world? Eli's voice cut through the tension, his tone sharp. "You're wasting your time, Lila. He's too far gone. He's already made his choice." Lila's gaze never left Michael. "You haven't chosen yet, Michael, but you will. And when you do, you'll finally understand the game you've been caught in." Michael's mind reeled. Was any of this real? Was his entire life nothing more than a series of manipulated decisions? The awakening. The room suddenly seemed to blur at the edges, as though the very fabric of reality was fraying. Michael blinked, his eyes stinging from the intensity of the moment, but when he opened them again, everything had changed. He was no longer in the cold, dimly lit room. The air was different, softer, warmer. He was lying on his back in a bed, the soft hum of a distant fan filling the quiet room. The sharp, oppressive weight of the circle, Eli and Lila, all of it was gone. There was no more tension, no more game. For a moment, Michael thought he was still dreaming. But as he sat up, his head throbbing, he realized something unsettling. This wasn't just a change in surroundings. This wasn't just a new location. It was a new reality. Altogether, he stumbled to the window and looked outside. The city stretched out before him, the same city he had known his whole life. But it felt distant, alien in a way he couldn't explain. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow across the buildings. But something was off. The world outside seemed distorted. He glanced around the room, his heart hammering in his chest. The familiar walls, the bed, everything felt strange, as if it were an illusion. How did I get here? The door to the room creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. It was Laura. Her expression was soft, as if nothing had ever happened between them. As if the betrayal, the lies, and the secrets had never existed. "Michael, are you okay?" she asked, concern lacing her voice. He froze. This wasn't right. This wasn't real. He could feel it deep in his bones. "Laura," he whispered, his voice trembling. "What's happening? Where are we?" She walked toward him, but there was something in her eyes, a look he had never seen before. It wasn't fear or betrayal. It was pity. "It's okay, Michael. Everything's okay now." But Michael couldn't shake the feeling that this was all wrong. The world around him felt too smooth, too perfect, as though it were a veneer, covering something darker beneath. "I don't understand," he said, his voice cracking. "What happened? Was all of it a dream? Was it real? The circle? Eli? Lila?" Laura's face softened, but her words were chilling. "That's just it, Michael. It was never real. Not in the way you thought." He stared at her, trying to make sense of the words. The game resumes. Michael rubbed his temples, trying to shake off the lingering fog of the dream. Or was it a dream? The lines between the two worlds had become so blurred that he could hardly tell where one ended and the other began. The apartment felt the same, but now it also felt off, as if the walls themselves were watching him, waiting for him to make the next move in a game that no longer had clear rules. He swung his legs off the bed, planting his feet firmly on the ground. The familiar hum of the city filtered through the windows, the noises of life outside almost mocking in their normalcy. He glanced at the clock. It was early, the morning light creeping through the blinds. Everything was in place, but his mind was a storm of confusion. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. Michael froze. His pulse quickened. Who would come now? He stood up slowly, his body tense. As he approached the door, His thoughts raced. Could it be her? Could it be Lila? Or someone from the circle? Or maybe it's Laura again? With one last deep breath, he opened the door. There stood Laura, but this time something was different about her. Her posture was rigid, her expression unreadable. There was a sense of urgency in the way she stood there, but something was off. Her eyes held a coldness, a detachment that made Michael's stomach drop. "Michael," she said, her voice distant. "We need to talk." Michael's heart hammered in, his chest. Talk? About what? His mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place, but never quite connecting. "What's going on, Laura?" Her gaze flickered to the side, then back to him. "This is real. I know you've been questioning everything, but this is real. We don't have much time." Michael blinked. "Real? What do you mean?" Before she could respond, a figure stepped out from the shadows behind her. It was Eli. Michael's heart dropped to his stomach. "No," he whispered. How is this possible?" Eli's smile was sharp, almost predatory. "Ah, Michael, you always were one for asking questions, weren't you? Too many, in fact. But you should know by now, the truth isn't something you get to control. The game has always been in play, and now it's your turn." Michael's mind reeled. He tried to process it all, the dream, the conversation with Lila, the distorted reality he had woken up to, and now this, Eli and Laura standing before him as if nothing had changed. His instincts screamed at him to run, to escape, but he felt rooted to the spot, trapped by the sheer weight of the situation. "You're all part of it?" Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. This is real, isn't it?" Laura nodded, her face unreadable. "It's real, but it's not what you think. Everything you believed, the circle, Eli's control, all of it, it's just a facade. The game is bigger than that." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. He had suspected as much, but hearing it out loud, from her of all people, made it all too real. "What's the game, then? What's the truth?" Eli stepped forward, his eyes glinting with amusement. "You're still playing catch-up, Michael. You always have been. You think you're the one being manipulated, but you're just as much a part of this as we are. The real game, the one that matters, it's about perception. It's about control over what you see and what you believe." Michael's hands clenched into fists. "And Lila? What was she trying to tell me? About waking up?" Eli's expression flickered for a moment, as though Michael had hit a nerve. "Lila is irrelevant now. She served her purpose." He turned to Laura, his voice softening, but the edge of cruelty still evident. "And as for you, Michael, you've been trapped in the illusion for so long, you can't even tell what's real anymore. But you're about to find out." The weight of Eli's words hung heavily in the air. Michael's mind spun as he tried to grasp at the threads of truth, but they were all slipping through his fingers. Had the dream been a warning? Or was it part of the game itself? Laura, who had been silent for too long, stepped closer to Michael. "You have to make a choice, Michael," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You can either keep playing, keep chasing after the lies, or you can break free. But if you choose to break free, there will be consequences. You'll never be able to go back." Michael's heart skipped a beat. "Break free from what?" "From everything," Laura said, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "From the game, from the people pulling the strings, from the illusion that has been woven around you your entire life. You've been living in a world that isn't yours, a reality that's been carefully constructed for you. But if you choose to see the truth, if you choose to walk away, it'll change everything, and you might not like what you find." Eli's laughter cut through the tension. You think you can just walk away, Michael? You're too deep in it now. The game doesn't let you leave. The fork in the road, the silence that followed Laura's words was deafening. Michael stood frozen in the doorway, torn between two realities, each one pulling him in a different direction. Eli's shadow loomed over him, but Laura's eyes, the vulnerability in them, felt like a tether to something real, something human. His mind buzzed with questions, with doubts. Was any of this real? Was the truth truly something he could create? You don't get it, do you? Eli's voice cut through the stillness. You're not special, Michael. You're not the hero in this story. You're just a pawn, like the rest of us. And no matter what you do, no matter how much you try to control it, you'll always be part of the game. Michael's fists clenched at his sides. No, it can't be true. He had spent so long fighting for his own sense of truth, seeking redemption, justice for the betrayals that had broken him. To hear Eli, to hear the man who had orchestrated so much of his suffering, tell him he was nothing but a pawn. It was the final blow, and yet, in that final blow, Michael saw the truth in Eli's words. The game was real, but he could still choose how to play it. His heart beat faster, and for the first time, Michael let himself breathe deeply. He was no longer waiting for someone else to hand him the answers. He didn't have to accept Eli's version of the world, Laura's fears, or Lila's cryptic warnings. Maybe you're right, Michael said, his voice calm, controlled, despite the storm inside him. Maybe I'm just a pawn, but I'm done letting anyone tell me who I am. Laura's eyes flickered with concern, but Michael wasn't looking at her anymore. His gaze was fixed on Eli. You're right, Eli. I've been caught in your web, trapped by your games, but I'm done playing by your rules. I'll make my own. Eli's expression tightened, his lips curling into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You think you can just walk away? You can't escape this, Michael. Not now. Not after everything you've seen. The game will follow you. Always. Michael felt a surge of defiance rise within him. Let the game follow him, then. He had already been broken by it, burned by its lies and manipulations. What more could it take from him? I'll take my chances, he said firmly. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with finality. For a moment, Eli simply stared at him, as if trying to gauge the truth in Michael's eyes. Then, with a sigh, Eli turned toward the door. You'll regret this, Michael, Eli muttered, a cold edge in his voice. But we'll see how far you can run. The game always catches up in the end. As Eli walked out of the apartment, Michael stood there, his body trembling, his mind spinning. Was this the right choice? Was he truly breaking free from the game, or had he just sealed his fate by defying it? Laura stepped closer, her hand outstretched, but Michael took a step back. He couldn't do this with her anymore. She had been a part of the illusion too, whether she meant to be or not. His world wasn't going to make sense if he stayed in it. It had already begun to crack, and the more he tried to patch it together, the more it shattered. Michael, please, Laura's voice trembled. You don't understand what you're up against. It's not just Eli. There are bigger forces at play. The circle, it's everywhere. I understand enough, Michael said coldly. I don't need anyone's approval to walk away from this. I don't need anyone to tell me what's real. With that, he turned and walked out the door, leaving her standing in the silence of their apartment. The world beyond, the streets outside were bathed in the golden light of morning, the city bustling with life as if nothing had changed. But Michael knew better now. Nothing would ever be the same again. He walked for what felt like hours, his feet carrying him through streets he had known all his life. But even the familiarity of the buildings, the faces, the sounds, all of it felt foreign to him now. Like he was living in someone else's story. He had made a choice, but now, With the weight of it pressing on him, he wasn't sure if it was the right one. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He hesitated before pulling it out, dread filling his chest. As he saw the notification, it was a message from Lila. "It's not over. It never was. Don't trust the silence. You're being watched." Michael's stomach twisted. The feeling of being trapped returned, the invisible walls closing in around him. But this time, it was different. This time, he wasn't going to let fear dictate his choices. He thought of the dream, of waking up to the surreal reality that had felt so real and yet so fleeting. He thought of Laura and the look in her eyes. Was she a part of it too? And Eli. He could still feel the weight of Eli's words pressing on him. There was no escaping. The game. But maybe there was something more, something hidden just beneath the surface. A sudden thought struck him. What if this wasn't just about escaping the game? The shifting terrain. The world around Michael seemed to ripple with a new kind of energy, as if reality itself had been twisted ever so slightly by his declaration. His phone buzzed again, the vibrations almost too loud in the stillness of his mind. This time, it was a call. The name flashing on the screen made his heart skip. Lila. He hesitated, his finger hovering over the accept button. He had made his choice. He wasn't going back to the maze of lies. But this felt different. He knew he couldn't ignore her. "Hello?" he answered, his voice sharp, betraying the anxiety that had been gnawing at him. "Michael." Lila's voice came through, shaky but urgent. "You don't understand. It's not what you think. You're not just playing a game. You're in one." Michael clenched his jaw, fighting the rising tide of frustration. "I know I'm in a game, Lila. I've known that for a long time. But I'm done being the pawn." "No," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You've always been more than that, Michael. But you need to know the truth. You need to understand who's pulling the strings." He felt his stomach drop. "Who's pulling the strings?" "What are you talking about?" Michael demanded, stepping off the sidewalk and into the street, his eyes scanning the faces around him. "What's going on? What's really happening?" Lila paused. He could almost hear her struggling to keep her composure. "It's all connected. The circle, Eli, Laura, everything. There's something bigger behind it all. Something you don't see. Something you haven't been told." Her voice broke. "Michael, you're being tested, not just by Eli, but by someone else, someone who's watching everything you do." He felt a rush of unease. "Who? Who is this person?" "You don't want to know," she said, her voice trembling now. "But if you really want to break free, if you want to change the game, you have to find them first. You have to find them and make them see you." The line went dead. Michael stood frozen in the middle of the street, his mind reeling. "Make them see me?" He ran the words through his mind over and over, each time trying to fit them into some larger puzzle he couldn't quite understand. Who was she talking about? What was the real game? He began to walk again, more slowly this time, his thoughts racing. Lila's warning echoed in his mind. Someone bigger was watching, pulling strings from the shadows. Michael realized that whatever the truth was, it was buried beneath layers of deceit, manipulation, and perhaps even lies within lies. And now, it's up to me to expose it. As he moved through the streets, Michael couldn't help but notice something strange. There were eyes on him. Too many. Not in the sense that he was being watched by people he knew, but by faces he'd never seen. Strange, unfamiliar faces just at the edges of his vision. When he turned to look, they would vanish, slipping back into the crowd. But when he wasn't looking, they were there. He had felt it before, a faint unease at the back of his mind. But now it was unmistakable. He was being watched. The new player. Later that night, as he sat at the edge of his bed, Michael stared at the phone in his hands, replaying Lila's words. You have to find them. But find who? How? The phone buzzed again, this time with a text message from an unknown number. We know what you're doing. You're getting closer, but you still don't understand. Come to 47th and East End at midnight. The game begins now. Michael's breath caught in his throat. He stood abruptly, the urgency in his veins palpable. The message was clear, and yet... Who was it? His pulse thumped in his ears. He didn't hesitate. The clock was ticking. Final move. By the time Michael arrived at the specified location, the streets were eerily quiet. He glanced around, but the area seemed abandoned, empty, save for the occasional flicker of a distant street lamp. He didn't know why, but every instinct told him to keep moving forward. Then he saw it. A figure standing in the shadows near. A broken-down building. Michael couldn't make out the face, but he felt an undeniable pull, like the figure knew something he didn't, something that was integral to his path. Michael, the figure said, their voice muffled by the night. You came. I wasn't sure you would. Michael's heart raced. Who are you? His voice cracked, almost betraying the anxiety that gripped him. The figure stepped closer, revealing just enough of themselves to be seen clearly. It was a woman, tall, with dark hair and sharp features. She wore a long black coat that seemed to blend with the night around her. You're asking the wrong question, she said with a soft smile. Who I am doesn't matter. What matters is what you do next. Michael narrowed his eyes. What's this? Another part of the game? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she took a step forward, her gaze piercing. You were right to break away, but there's a cost. To everything. You can't just walk away from the game without consequences. The price of truth. The silence around Michael felt suffocating now. The woman's words echoed in his mind, swirling through him like a storm. Every choice has consequences. He had known that, of course. But now, more than ever, it felt like the weight of every decision, every misstep, every revelation was slowly closing in on him. The empty streets stretched out before him, each step feeling heavier than the last. His instinct screamed at him to leave, to turn back, to forget this path and go home. But there was no going home anymore. There was no peace in that world. He had burned that bridge the moment he walked out. The game. He had thought he was escaping it. He had thought he was making his own choices. But the more he played, the more he realized he had never truly been in control. Michael walked toward the abandoned building the woman had stepped into. Something inside told him that the answers, the truth, were hidden inside. And for all, the warnings, all the cryptic words, he had no other choice but to follow this thread to the end, the doorway to darkness. The building loomed in front of him like a forgotten relic, its walls decaying under years of neglect. The door creaked as he pushed it open, stepping into a dimly lit corridor that seemed to stretch on forever. The smell of dust and old wood filled his nostrils. His footsteps echoed eerily in the silence, each step carrying him deeper into the unknown. At the end of the hall, a faint light flickered from underneath a closed door. The intensity of his curiosity, the desire for answers, pushed him forward, even as a voice inside warned him to stop. As he reached for the door handle, a familiar voice broke the stillness. You shouldn't be here. Michael spun around, his heart racing as he saw Lila standing in the shadows, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. What are you doing here? Michael demanded, his voice low. How did you know I'd be here? Lila took a step closer, her gaze darting nervously to the door behind him. I had to follow you. I had no choice. Michael, you don't understand. There's no way out once you step inside. He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. You're right about that. I thought I could walk away from this. Thought I could make my own choices. But now I see, maybe I'm already too far gone. You are too far gone, Lila whispered, her voice trembling. But you don't have to go any further. You still have a choice. You can walk away from this. You can turn around and— No! Michael cut her off, his tone hardening. I've made my choice. I've spent too long being manipulated, being led around like a puppet. I need to know the truth, everything. I won't stop until I do. Lila's face twisted in anguish. Then you'll regret it, Michael. You won't. Just lose yourself in there. You'll lose everything. You'll lose me. His chest tightened, the weight of her words sinking in. The love he had once felt for her, the promises they had made, felt distant, as if they belonged to another time, another version of himself. He reached out instinctively, but she recoiled, her eyes full of unshed tears. Then let me go, she said softly. This isn't the way. Michael took a long, steadying breath. I have to know. I have to end this. For both of us. With one last look at Lila, he pushed open the door. The truth unveiled inside was a small, dimly lit room. At the center, a table was covered in papers, maps, and photographs, all scattered haphazardly. It looked like the work of 1,000 minds, piecing together some grand puzzle. A man was sitting at the table, his back to Michael. He didn't turn. When Michael entered, "You found me," the man said quietly. "I thought it would take you longer. You're more determined than I gave you credit for." Michael's blood ran cold. "Who are you?" he demanded, stepping into the room, his eyes scanning the chaos on the table. Some of the photographs showed him, his face blurred, as though someone had been following him for much longer than he had realized. The man turned slowly, revealing a face Michael never thought he'd see again. Eli. You, Michael's voice caught in his throat. You've been behind this the entire time. Eli smiled faintly, a cold, unsettling smile. Not just me. You're part of something much bigger, Michael. You've been a piece of the puzzle all along, just like the rest of us. The truth, it's always been right in front of you. Michael felt his pulse quicken. What truth? What do you want from me? Eli stood up, brushing off his coat. I want you to see the whole picture, Michael. I want you to understand that the game you've been playing, the one you thought you were escaping, it never ends. You're not the only one who's been tested. We all have. Michael shook his head, unable to comprehend. But this is where it all ends, right? You're pulling the strings, but I'm not your puppet anymore. Eli's expression shifted, becoming almost pitying. You still don't get it.